So it's recording. So
All
good
right.
evening to one and all, and good evening to our speaker, Dr. Swapna Prabhu. She happens to be my senior in Hyderabad University, and we are very much informally connected, even though we are also having some kind of professional compulsion. So today's speaker currently she is serving as an assistant professor of political science in the Department of Political Science, Utkal University, Bhubaneswar. She has obtained her, Master in Arts, MPhil and PhD degree from the University of Hyderabad. She has more than 10 years of teaching experience at the PG level at different universities in Odisha, including Ravenshaw University, National Law University Odisha, Fakirmon University. She has successfully guided several scholars for PhD and MPhil degree. She has published several research papers in reputed journals and published two books. First is the politics of child care and isolated activism. That's the first, and the second, in search of perfect cop, the philosophy of community policing in India, theory and practice. And her area of research interest include political philosophy, women studies, and global politics. And interestingly, today she will deliver uh, her talk on social constructivist approach in international relation. Even though in the latter stage I found that she was trying to give talk on a different topic, but that is not exclusively different. I mean, it's all related. So now I request my PG student Pradeep to introduce the topic, and subsequently Dr. Prabhu will start her deliberation. Yes, Pradeep, you can.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible.
Thank you, sir. Respected keynote speaker of today's talk, Dr. Swapna Prabhu, respected convener of this web talk, Dr. Himanshu Sekhar Mishra, sir, and all other participants. A very good evening to one and all. It is my proud privilege to introduce the topic of today's talk. Thank you so much, sir, for providing me this opportunity. The title of today's talk is Social Constructivist Approach to International Politics. International politics is known to be the youngest branch of social science. As politics refers to an art of possibility, international politics studies the possibility among nation states in avoiding war or conflict and maintaining sustainable peace. International politics studies why nations behave the way they behave. According to Charles P. Schulcher, international politics includes all international relations. However, all international relations are not political. Public diplomacy has become a most relevant instrument of foreign policy because the conduct of international relations has become more public and the public has become more involved. Public diplomacy challenges the primacy of material power in achieving outcomes and offers an alternative model of practice that understands the normative or ideational structure underpinning audience identities and gains influence by engaging through the shared understanding of this intersubjective dimension, including through social interactions and interplay. Here lies the convergence between public diplomacy and social constructivism. In seeking to achieve objectives, realize value, or defend interest, government must communicate with those whose actions and behavior they wish to deter, alter, or reinforce. The constructivists put international relation and public diplomacy in the context of broader social relations. It considers how states' interests and identities are shaped by rule governed or norm governed interactions. In brief, constructivism points out how norms influence state interest and behavior. It emphasizes on the socially constructed nature of actors and their identities and interests. Thus, the state's conception of interest, its presentation of itself on the international stage, and its behavior all might change as a result of interstate interactions. States, like people, came to see themselves as others see them. Today's talk tries to look into the ways in which constructivist theories of international relation can inform public diplomacy and other practices uh, pertaining to international relations, and look into how the agency and structures are mutually constituted, and how identities are representation of an actor's understanding of who they are, which in turn signals their interest. Thank you, sir.
So thank you, Pradeep. Uh, you know, uh, something I can sense, I got it, and something not. So I hope that when Dr. Prabhu will deliberate, certainly we will get a sense. I think we are in a position to get sense. We can understand. If not, then Dr. Prabhu is there. We can clarify it from her. So with this introduction, now I welcome once again to Dr. Prabhu. And Didi, you can start your deliberation right now.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu, and thank you, Pradeep. It was a very good introduction to the topic that we are going to discuss and deliberate on this Sunday evening. As we were discussing few minutes back, I really extend my gratitude to Dr. Himanshu and also congratulate him to have started such a good initiative of a series of lectures which are definitely going to go a long way, in infusing a sense of confidence amongst the children, and also they would have a conceptual clarity and have a good understanding about the issues and the challenges that the national and world community is facing. They would be in a position to discuss further and think beyond. So thank you once again, Dr. Himanshu, to have invited me to be a part of this great initiative. Now, as Pradeep has rightly pointed out, the discussion of today is going to be revolving around one of the most interesting and a very contemporary theory to the study of international relations and international politics, that is the social constructivist approach. Now, before we go into the detail, in order to understand what this theory of social constructivism stands for and what is its relevance in understanding international politics, we need to understand, first of all, what it means and the background against which this particular theory emerged. Because as students of political science, as well as the students of international relations, one thing which I always insist to my students is that whenever you say that a particular theory emerged during a particular period of time, you should be very clear as to why that particular period, what was so specific about that time, and what were the conditions or factors which were responsible for the emergence of this particular theory at that time, and why not before that. So these are things which we would begin with, and then we would go into the details of understanding what this theory stands for and what is this, social constructivist approach that we are talking about to the study of international relations. We will look into its usefulness in understanding international politics, and then in the meanwhile, we would also look into the basic assumptions that this theory, stands for. Now, as the very term itself suggests, social constructivism, it actually talks about how realities are socially constructed. Now, this is one catchword, which we all should remember the moment we talk about social constructivism. How realities are socially constructed is the main focus of attention of this particular theory. Now, when we talk, we will discuss in detail as to what we mean by this, what we mean by realities. We will come to know about this in a few minutes from now. Now, social constructivist approach to the study of international relations is what? It is basically a social theory. It is a social theory which emphasizes the social construction of international affairs. It emphasizes on the social construction of international affairs as against some of the basic assumptions by some mainstream theories like neorealism, which talks about how international affairs and world politics can be understood in terms of rational choice behavior. Mainstream theories like neorealism, neoliberalism, and others had talked a lot about anarchy, for example, and their main emphasis was on why do the states behave the way they do. Like Pradeep was very rightly pointing out that he had very nicely put forward this, that when we talk of politics, it is the art of governing public affairs. And he rightly pointed out that how when we talk of when we talk of social construction, and more specifically when we relate it to politics, it is all about how we perceive the nation states, our interactions with them, and how norms play a very important role in it. Now, here lies the significance of social constructivism, and this as an approach to the study of international relations. Now, let us first look at when did it emerge and how did it emerge. Now, this is a theory which, like most of the post-positivist approaches to the study of international relations, social constructivism also emerged way back in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, that was the period which, for the students of international relations was and still remains very significant, because, that was the time, if you closely observe, you would realize that, late 1970s and 1980s was the time period when most of the contemporary theories of international relations and even political theories were actually emerging. Now, what was so specific about the late 1970s and 80s, and why is it that almost all the contemporary theories that we talk about today, whether it is postmodernism, social constructivism, post-structuralism, or neo-Marxism, neo-colonialism, neo-liberalism, these are the theories which emerged during the same time period, 1970s and 1980s. What was so specific about that time period? Now, if you look at that particular time, it was, of course, the period of Cold War, but 1960s onwards, we talk about how the period of Deaton has started, marking the relaxation of tensions between the superpowers. Now, relaxation of tensions between the then existing superpowers, it in a to a great extent, it was a way towards changing the entire dynamics of global politics. Scholars and nation states together, they started thinking and looking at issues beyond state, defense, and military. It is that was the time period when scholars and nation states started understanding the fact that it apart from the so-called territorial states, state sovereignty, the giving emphasis always on defense and military, there is something beyond that. And that beyond, something that existed beyond was being explored by the scholars and nation states. Why? Because the world was going through relaxation of tensions. That gave them a scope and also the opportunity to think beyond issues which already existed. And that is how, as students of IR, if you would closely observe, that was the time period when most of the important treaties relating to disarmament, and also most of the international treaties and conventions relating to environment and climate change were being initiated. For instance, if you talk about Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, it was signed in 1968. If you talk about the first very important environmental convention, that was Stockholm Convention of 1972, that actually related human beings with environment directly, giving rise to a new program under the United Nations called UNEP. United Nations Environment Program. So, somewhere we can see that the world was thinking beyond the state, military, and defense, and trying to explore new ideas, new ways of looking things. And, as again, Pradeep had rightly pointed out that, international relations is what? It is more about understanding why the states behave the way they do. IR and global politics is what? It is simply a discipline which will help us to understand why do states behave the way they do. This is something which has been the main objective of almost all the theories of IR. Now, social constructivism, as an approach was initiated or propounded by many scholars, but one of the most important scholars associated with social constructivism and this as an approach to IR was Alexander Wendt, the American political scientist, who had written a very interesting, very famous book called Anarchy is What the States Make of It, the social construction of power politics. So this was a book that Alexander Wendt, the American political scientist, had written way back in 1992. Now, this was one such book which brought about a huge kind of a revolution in the way nation states understood realities. Now, let us look at the first important assumption, which assumptions will take up a little later, but one particular catchword of social constructivism, as I just now mentioned, was that social constructivism mentions that realities are socially constructed. Now, when we say realities are socially constructed, we have to understand that this particular phrase in bits. Now, first we have to understand what do we mean by these realities. Now, realities, as per this theory of social constructivism, it can mean anything which has been given a definite meaning by all of us, by the people, by the society, by the nation states. Like, what is sovereignty? What do you mean by state sovereignty? What do you mean by the term refugee? What do you mean by the very term state? What is the meaning of citizenship? How would you define the concept of human rights? What is gender? One very good example, what is gender? If you closely observe each and every term that has been used either in political science broadly or in international relations more specifically, you would understand that these terms, these terms have been defined in a very specific manner. And most of these definitions are now under question. And that is the reason most of these post-positivist approaches like postmodernism and post-structuralism are doing what? They are deconstructing many of this, many of the meanings associated with these terms. The postmodernists are trying to deconstruct the meaning of what we mean by terrorism. Why should terrorism be defined in a very specific and fixed way? Why can't it be looked at from a different perspective altogether? Why should terrorism be understood as something which instills a sense of terror in the minds of the people? Why can't it be looked at as a consequence of something? So, people are, scholars are trying to deconstruct these realities. Realities means the terms which have got a fixed meaning. Now, social constructivism here in international relations, it tries to understand why these concepts and terms have got a specific and definite meaning. Is there a necessity to change their meanings altogether? And how can we do it? And most importantly, why do the terms get a specific meaning? Who gives them a meaning? Like when we say sovereignty is supreme power of the state, who says this? It can be something else as well. In the globalized world today, sovereignty of the nation states is now being redefined. It is not exactly the way it was looked at maybe a few years back, or when the Treaty of Westphalia had first introduced the term sovereignty. Sovereignty is not being looked at in the same way like it was earlier. So this itself shows that meanings are always, Parmeshwar is having some doubts. We will definitely, you may note it down, all students. Any doubts or any clarifications you need, you write it down in the question answer session. We will take it up. Okay, I'll appreciate that. So these are the terms which have got definite meanings. Now, as I told you in the beginning itself, social constructivism is also one of the post-positivist approaches. Now, post-positivist approaches are what? Again, as I told you, most of the contemporary theories of IR, like the social constructivism, post-structuralism, post-modernism, all these theories are called as post-positivist approach. Even critical theory. Why are they called the post-positivist approaches? One of the major assumptions or beliefs of post-positivist approaches is that post-positivism believes that there can never be any objective reality out there waiting to be discovered. Post-positivist approaches believe that there can never be any objective reality separate from our ideas, our belief systems, our values and assumptions. Our means the observer. In other words, there can be no objective reality which can be understood separate from the ideas, values, and assumptions of the observer. It is always related. Okay. Whereas if you closely look at neoliberalism or neorealism, most importantly neorealism, if you look at, they always talk about objective realities. They always talk about material aspects of defense and military and power. But social constructivists and other post-positivist approaches say that if you talk about any objective reality, always remember that they are somewhere related to our own ideas, values, and belief systems, because of which we give them a meaning. Now, I just wanted to give this example of public diplomacy just to make it clear, as to how social constructivism can be used as an approach to international relations. One way which we can justify this is by understanding the concept of public diplomacy. Now, public diplomacy is something which is very, very much talked about today, and as Pradeep rightly pointed out, it is one of the most important instruments of foreign policy because as he rightly said, the way the very conduct of international relations today has become very public in nature, and the public have got very much involved in policy making and influencing policy making. Like, for example, if I would give you the example of Ministry of External Affairs, the MEA, had very recently set up a new division under MEA, that was the Public Diplomacy Division. It was set up way back in 2006. 2006 MEA had set up a new division itself specifically on public diplomacy. That itself very clearly shows the fact as to how soft power today has become a very important feature of India's foreign policy. Now, public diplomacy is very closely associated with social constructivism. Now, how is it? What is public diplomacy is something which we should understand first. It is something, it is the ways, public diplomacy is simply the ways and the means by which states, sub-states, and the non-state actors come to understand each other's culture, come to understand each other's attitudes and behavior, and based on that, they establish and manage relationship with each other, what we call as international relations, and how these international relations in turn impacts their ideas and actions, which in turn would help them to advance their own interests. Like, for example, I will give you examples which will make it very clear. Like for example, if you talk about the present context of Russia-Ukraine crisis, the war that was going on between the two countries, the entire world community today is against the way India has taken a very neutral stand all the time very often abstaining from voting in the United Nations on the Russia issue. But India, on the other hand, has constantly emphasized on the fact that India stands for one of the basic principles of India's foreign policy, which believes in peaceful, pacific, and amicable resolution or solution to international conflicts. And this is exactly what India is urging to Russia and to Ukraine, that it is only through diplomacy and dialogue that the two nation states can come at talks to each other and can help, and this is something that can help them to resolve this particular crisis. They have been maintaining this from the beginning because it is one of the basic principles of India's foreign policy, which has, and when we use the word principle, it means what? It is something that is a guiding force. It guides our actions and the kind of decisions that we take. So public diplomacy is all about soft power, that we talk about how we understand each other's culture, behavior, and then we get into relationship with that country, and then we try to build up our relationship, that is international relations, and then through those international relations we slowly try to advance our own interests. Now this is what is public diplomacy. Now let us quickly come to understand how, again, why do the states behave the way they do according to social constructivists. Now the social constructivists basically say that when the states seek certain objectives which they have upheld for themselves, and when they are realizing the values that the nation state stands for, and when the nation state is trying to defend its own interests, the government, social constructivism says that the governments must always communicate with those actors and behave in such a way by which they would be able to either deter or alter or reinforce their behavior. In other words, social constructivism simply says that if you want to alter, deter, or reinforce the behavior of some country, then what you should do as a nation state, you should try to realize their objectives, and at the same time try to defend your own interests. And by understanding the behavior and attitudes of those countries, you should be ready to communicate accordingly, keeping in mind your understanding of their actions and behavior. Somewhere it is all about how we perceive. It is all about how we perceive the actions of the nation states, how we try to perceive and then analyze it based on two things, based on their norms and identities. Now this takes us to another important level. For social constructivists, two things which are or two aspects relating to the nation states which is very essential is norms and identities. Now what are these norms and what are these identities is something we have to understand. Social constructivism says that these are the two aspects which control or which regulate the behavior of nation states. Okay, these are the two aspects which regulate the behavior of the nation states in international relations: your identity and the norms that you uphold. Now here norms, of course, we all know, these are some social values, unwritten rules that we all tend to follow, given the fact that these have been there with us since generations. Given the traditional significance associated with certain practices, these practices become norms. So norms are generally unwritten rules or values which we accept as acceptable behavior. When in international relations we say this is an acceptable behavior, this is not an acceptable behavior, on what grounds do we generally say? It is based on norms, social norms. So this is one thing which is very important according to social constructivists, to understand what is international relations. And second is identity. Now what is identity? According to the social constructivists, Identity is something which is a representative of an actor's conception of one's own self. How an actor or how a nation state conceives of one own self. How does India look at itself today on the world stage? That is its own identity. That gives it its own identity. In other words, your identities, according to the social constructivists, would influence your interests. So, what do the social constructivists say? First of all, you will create an identity of yourself as a nation state, and then this identity would thereby influence your national interests. Now, before we go into what national interests are, according to the social constructivists, we should know how identities are created. Now, here, the social constructivists say that identities are created through interactions between the nation states. When nation states interact with each other, identities are created. And these identities is nothing but how do we look at ourselves, and this identity would then give rise to our interests, our national interests. So in other words, we should remember one thing, that identities are not fixed, they are dynamic, they keep changing. For instance, what was India's identity soon after India got its independence in 1947? It is very, very different from what it is today. India, I would say it would be derogatory to refer to India as a third world country today. I always suggest my students to refer to India as not a third world country, but as one of the fastest emerging economies in the world. If we are not able to call it as a developed nation, given certain indicators in mind, still we can call it as one of the fastest emerging economies in the world. Because we all know, whether it is about economic stability or whether it is about geopolitics, and geographical advantages, or whether it is about soft power, or whether it is about the Indian armed forces or the Indian defense, India is amongst the first four. And today we are also we are also very proud that India has also become a member of the Star Wars group. I think one of the four countries which are considered to be members in the Star Wars groups, which is having some kind of a domination over the space. India is also having a dominating position in the space, and that's why it has become one of the important members in the Star Wars group. So today's identity of India is so different from what it was today, what it was in 1947. Now, why is it? The social constructivists say this is because of the way India has been interacting with the nation states in the last few years. It is not about which government or who was the political leader. Of course, that matters a lot, but then how India has you know developed in the last few decades, and reached up to this level. These interactions with the nation states has actually given an identity to India, and then this identity is now translating into our national interest. This identity gives us a national interest. Now, I will give you a small example here. uh, Social constructivists say that identities constitute interests and actions of the nation states. Identities constitute the interests and actions of any given state. Now, here I will give you the example of a small state and a big state. Now, if you take a small state, a small country, a state means here the country. If you take a small country, a weak country for that matter, take the example of a sub-Saharan African country, Uganda, Ethiopia. Take a small sub-Saharan African country, and what is their identity? Their identity is that they are a small, weak country. Some scholars also prefer to give them the identity of a fourth world state. Now, fourth world state is what? Fourth world countries are those countries which are almost on the verge of extinction. They may vanish from the world map anytime because of their because of their economic, political, and geographical vulnerabilities. These countries are so poor. They are poor not just in military and political stability, but they also do not have any natural resources, because of which nobody is ready to invest in these sub-Saharan African countries. So what is their identity? Their identity is that of a fourth world or a weak country. Now, this is their identity. Now, this identity has given rise to their national interest. What is their national interest? Their national interest is not to build up huge army or military or defense. Their national interest is simply economic growth and survival. They only want survival and economic growth. Whereas on the other hand, you talk about United States, you talk about you talk about any big power. What is their identity? They are the they are the developed industrialized countries. This is how we refer to big countries, highly developed and industrialized countries. That is their identity. Now, that identity has given rise to their interest, which is what? Establishing economic, political, and military domination. Okay, they want economic, political, and military domination over the rest of the globe in some way, either visible or invisible ways. So, this is exactly what the social constructivists say when they say that, identities very often translate themselves into interests and actions. Now, let us look at, generally, social constructivists say that the nation states broadly have four kinds of national interests. They say the nation states broadly have four kinds of national interest according to the social constructivists. First is something which reminds us of the realist, that first objective is interests of survival. So survival is the first important and one of the prime objectives and interests of any nation state. Okay, survival. Second, of course, is autonomy and independence. So first objective of a nation state's national interest is survival. Second is autonomy and independence. And the third, of course, is economic well-being, and the fourth being collective self-esteem. So, as I told you in the initial line, in the beginning itself, that this is one such theory which opposes the basic views by realism and neorealism. This theory does not believe in the fact that anarchy has given rise to conflict amongst the nation states. Somewhere social constructivism says that identities are created when nation states interact with each other. And we all know, as students of IR, one thing we know, as Pradeep had rightly said, one basic thing is IR the most important basic objective of international relations is to understand why do the states behave the way they do. Secondly, international relations is a subject which tries to understand what is the existing world order. Now, when you use the term world order, what is it? It is nothing but a framework within which the nation states interact with each other. Okay, this is a general understanding of world order, which talks about how the nation state, the actors and agents are, how they are placed and how do they interact with each other. That gives rise to the kind of world order that exists. So, the basic political science theory also talks about something called system, political system, whether you talk of David Easton or, whether you talk of Alexander Wendt, they are also talking about system. And when you talk about system, it is all about units and, how these units are arranged and how they interact with each other. In international relations, units means what? Units means, they can be actors, non-state actors, or they can even be very influential individuals. That very young girl, Greta Thunberg, who has raised this issue of environment. It can also be Joseph, Malala, or, Mahatma Gandhi, who brought to this world the relevance, who taught to this world the relevance of, non-violence, satyagraha. The reason why the world looks up to India as, a strongest democracy in the world. So, there can be individuals as well, states and non-state actors, who are the actors in international politics, and how they interact with each other will give rise to the kind of world order that exists. Now, here, you know, here it actually makes us makes it very clear that interaction is very, very natural in international politics, given the fact that we know no nation state can live in isolation. No nation state can live in isolation. Interactions are very natural. If you talk about, for instance, what happened with North Korea. North Korea was 2 3 years back being looked at or being referred to as a rogue country by some big powers, because it was going on testing its nuclear weapons one after the other, even after getting so many warnings from the United Nations and big powers like US, UK, and others. Still, North Korea was going on its nuclear spree, but suddenly it had to stop. Why? Because this is the basic idea on which international relations thrives on, that no nation state can live in isolation. They have to depend on each other for their survival, and dependence does not mean that you lose your autonomy. It is about interaction and communication. So interaction is very important, and this is exactly what the social constructivists say. When the nation states start interacting with the world, then they slowly start getting an identity of themselves, and when they get an identity, which is a dynamic process, it keeps changing. Your identity keeps changing. Depending upon the changing identity, your national interest would also change. And at the end of the day, it is all about interaction. It is all, and interaction begins with ideas. Now, this was a general discussion. Now let us quickly look into what are the basic assumptions of social constructivism as an approach to international relations. What are the basic assumptions of this theory? The first important assumption is that it believes that realities are socially constructed. Take the example of anarchy. Anarchy is a term which has been defined in different ways by different scholars. Like, for instance, if you talk about neorealism, neorealism maintains that anarchy is something which is responsible for conflicts among the nation states, because there is no central authority, and that's why nation states are always constantly in a conflict with each other, and that's why there has to be a situation where every nation state wants to maximize its power. So from a negative point of view, if you look at neoliberals, they say yes, anarchy is there, but it is because of anarchy that cooperation amongst the nation state becomes inevitable. So that is from positive perspective. So you can see these two theories, neorealism and neoliberalism, both agreed to the fact that yes, there is anarchy, there is absence of central authority at the international global level, but how they define it is different. So this is exactly what the social constructivists say, that it is all about how we perceive things, all about how we understand things. Now, the second most important assumption is that it believes that the states exist within a world of their own making. The states exist within a world of their own making. That means if you yourself as a third world country, it is because you have given yourself an identity. If you want to change that identity, you try to understand what are the ways by which we can change our identity. This exactly is what has been done today. Today the Indian state is actually projecting itself as one of the strongest soft powers. Soft power is a concept which was not so much discussed about few years back, but today suddenly India is being looked at the international stage with so much of respect. It has a very special place on the world platform. Why? Because of the soft power. So this soft power is one tool and technique which has been used by the Indian state to give itself an identity of its own. So this is exactly what the second assumption says, that the states exist within a world of their own making. Now, the third most important assumption is that this theory believes that states are social rather than material. States are social. States means countries. States are social rather than material. In other words, social constructivism is totally against the understanding of states as only territorial entities, like what Machiavelli had, many years back defined, centuries back, had defined this modern state as having a territory, boundary, sovereignty, population. The social constructivists say it is not just about what kind of military does the state has, what kind of security system does the state has. It is not just about the military aspects, how what is the level of standing army that you have. It is not about that. It is also social in nature. In other words, as I told you, it is a social theory. It believes that individuals are to be considered as important, as far as giving an identity to the state is concerned. So that is very important. Things beyond material has to be looked into when we define a state. The fourth most important assumption is that, as we discussed a few minutes back, it believes that, social interactions always shape the interests and identities of the states. Social interactions will always shape the interests and identities of the state. Now, many years back in 1971, during the period of Cold War, when India under Indira Gandhi, decided to go for a friendship treaty with the Soviet Union. That was the first time in the history of the Indian state that India decided to slowly align with one big power, that was the Soviet Union, the friendship treaty of 1971. And since then we know that the present Russia has been one of the closest allies of India, has been one of the biggest suppliers of defense equipments to India. Nuclear energy, Kudankulam nuclear power plant, which is in Tamil Nadu, is in association with Russia. Whether we talk of BrahMos cruise missiles, it is again in association with Russia. So Russia has always been a close ally. This kind of an interaction that we had with Russia and have been having with Russia since 1971, this interaction has actually shaped our interests and the way we behave towards Russia. So you can understand why India is now taking a very neutral stand by not overtly saying anything against Russia in the present context of Ukraine-Russia war. Somewhere this is what the social constructivists were trying to say. Interactions always will lead to the kind of identities we have and the way we look at each other as nation states. Then the fifth most important assumption is that it believes that the key structures in the state system are intersubjective and not material. Again, the same thing. Intersubjective aspects are more important actors in a state system rather than material aspects. So they, in other words, they say, for example, I'll give you an example of how intersubjectivity is more important than materiality. Think of a 500, 500 a strong army of the United Kingdom. Just think of a huge army that the United Kingdom has stationed near its borders, and a small nuclear threat from Russia. Which one do you think will be more terrorizing to the United States? Certainly, for the United States, even the deployment of 500 long range of military and army on the UK border will not be as threatening to it as it would be when a small threat, a nuclear threat comes from a big power like Russia. Why is it? it is because of the fact that United States has given has an idea about how UK would behave, and it has an idea about how Russia can behave, given based on the interactions that United States has had with European Union or UK, or for that matter with Russia. So it is all about perceptions. It is much more about perceptions than material reality. Somewhere our perceptions, if they change, it can change international politics altogether. How we interact and communicate with each other to a great extent can resolve some of the major international concerns. This is one of the reasons, as I told you, India has been time and again saying this on the UN platform, that we want amicable and pacific resolution to Russia Ukraine war crisis through dialogues and discussions, because it believes that when we interact and communicate with each other, the what is called as language has a very tremendous power to resolve issues. This is one very important feature of all post positivist approaches. All the post positivist approaches give a lot of importance to language. They say knowledge is power. All the post positivist approaches believe that knowledge is power. In other words, whatever the big powers think about nuclear threat or about war, is something which will guide their behavior. So it all begins with our idea, culminating in interactions, giving an identity. Okay, so somewhere this is exactly how the social constructivists try to understand international politics, and this way, to a great extent, they are trying to give a solution to the existing conflict. Quickly, I will finish off 2-3 important assumptions. One being that it emphasizes on the this theory emphasizes on the meaning assigned to military material objects rather than their mere existence. Social constructivism in international relations emphasizes on the meaning given to the material objects rather than simply the existence of these material objects. For example, if you look at again army, I mean the standing army. If you look at the standing army positioned at the borders in China, how is India going to look at it? It would depend upon the kind of interactions that India has had with China, and most importantly, the meaning that India assigns to military, Chinese military. So that will guide us, to behave in a particular way. In other words, they say that again. If I give you the example of anarchy is a term, but this term is being given meaning in a different way by the neoliberals and neorealists. It is the same term. Anarchy is one term, and it means absence of any central authority on the world stage. Now, if you look at anarchy, it is being defined in a different way by neoliberals and a different way by neorealists. Now, this itself shows that the meaning associated with these material objects is more important to the social constructivists, because as we all know, meanings again are not fixed. They keep changing. The meaning that you assign to gender would be different from the way the meaning assigned by me. Like, for example, gender is a concept which has been discussed about right from the beginning. We generally say gender is a social construct. But today, but nobody had tried to define gender the way Judith Butler, one of the postmodern feminist scholars, Judith Butler had tried to define gender in a different way. She maintained that gender is a fluid concept. A fluid concept means it keeps changing, and she also maintained that gender is performative in nature. Performative in nature means the way one performs gives them their identity. So in other words, postmodern feminists wanted to completely erase the very concept of gender. They did not want they didn't want any women centric approaches. They wanted pro women policies. When the government talks about making gender sensitive policies, the postmodern feminists say no, we do not want any gender women centric policies. We do not want any gender centric women centric policies. What we want is pro women policies. So the way it is being looked at is different. Why? Because as the social constructivists say, it is not the material existing or the realities that exist amongst us, gender, sovereignty, state. These are all material realities that exist. Citizenship is another important material reality that exists. It is not important, what are these realities. What is important is the meaning assigned to this. How do we assign meaning to these meaning altogether, and the changing of meaning of these terms would mean changing the entire framework within which the nation states behave. So this is what this talk about. Now last 2-3 points. Another important assumption of this theory is that they believe that the key factors in social constructivism in IR are norms, identity, and ideas, which we have already discussed about. Norms, identities, and ideas are very important in international relations. Quickly, I'll give you why do we say norms are important. We always have talked about Asian values. When you talk of European Union, you look at European Union as a very good example of world integration. It is a very good example of how nation states can integrate and come together. But Asian values are also very, very popular. Asian values means what? Values of obedience to the authority, values of giving importance to the traditional cultural values, and values of understanding the state in a particular way. So Asian values have also played a very predominant role. Given these understanding of because of these Asian values, the most of the Asian nations would behave in a particular way in their international relations compared to how the European countries or the United States would behave. So this is what they say, that norms, identities, and ideas are very integral in international relations. And finally, they talk about how agency and structure of the international system and agencies are all mutually constituted. They are not separate. In other words, as we discussed a few minutes back, they say that structure means what? It is the international system. It is the framework within which the actors, nation states, non-state actors, individual actors, how these actors are interacting with each other. That talks about the structure. Now within the structure are agents. Again, agents can be nation states, but here I'm talking about agency. So agency means what? Agency is the ability of someone to act in a particular way. Okay, so within a given structure in international relations, every nation state has a particular capability to act in a particular way. Now this is interrelated, means the way a nation state interacts, it is to a great extent related to the kind of international structure that exists. So they always relate agency with the international structure. And most importantly, this is the last assumption. The social constructivists say that states have multiple identities. I always believe, and I'll always tell my students that if somebody would ask you what kind of world order exists today, then it is not necessary for you to say that there is a multipolar world order. Some of you may say there is a unipolar or bipolar world order. Rather, we can also always take this opportunity to say that there is a combination of 2 or 3 different kinds of order that is existing today. Because on the one hand, if we see big powers emerging more powerful, like United States, China, and now Russia. Apart from that, it is also the fact that regional organizations are playing a very, very important role today. So, how are we going to define the world order? So it can be a combination of these different kinds of world orders. This is exactly what the social constructivists say. States have multiple identities. They do not have a single identity, and these multiple identities the states get because of the kind of interaction they have with the nation states. It has a different kind of an identity when we talk of Indo-US relations. It has a different kind of an identity when we talk of India-Pakistan relations. Identities can be multiple and they are not fixed. So, in other words, to conclude, I would say that this discipline of international relations will always benefit from this theory of social constructivism, because it addresses to certain issues and concepts which were totally ignored by the mainstream theories like neoliberalism and neorealism. And it says that it is not just the material power. It says that it is not just the distribution of material power, wealth, and geography that explains state behavior, but also identities, interests, and norms that define the way the world behaves and nation states behave in their international relations. So, with these words, I stop here. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Now, some doubts and clarifications that some of you had, we can discuss it out now. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Prabhu. I think now onwards, I can call you Didi, right? Because we are connected. We are talking about social, not material. We are talking about informal, not rude formal. So I think this topic, though this is related to IR, but I can sense a theory in it. So I can say that this topic is all about international relation theory, or this is an approach, social constructivist approach. And I think till now I was thinking that realist approach is the most dominant approach in international relation. But this social constructivist approach, I think it is an approach, I will say that it may come under the idealist approach, that this and how we should design our world order, how we should design international relation. And very correctly you said that that what we call national interest, how a nation decides the national interest. It decides what the nation thinks about her identity, and what are the norms, that is actually the convention or the unwritten rules, what are the different nation state, they assign a kind of meaning to those norms. So identity, norms, and ideas, these three are the parameter of deciding the national interest. And how the identity is formed, it is formed because of the interaction, and this interaction is an ongoing interaction. Now I can remember, see, when I was a student, my teacher used to tell us that what happens to an individual, that happens to a nation state. And I mean, we know that. Do I have one identity? No, I don't. I do have multiple identity. And these multiple identities is because of my interaction with different individuals. So likewise, the state is also having the multiple identity. And very correctly, again, Didi told that identity is all about interest and action. Very correctly, he has provided 6 or 7 assumptions of social constructivist approach. I think it's all about the perception, how you perceive the world, how you perceive each other. That's how you can be secure. Otherwise, I mean, you want security, but you are going towards insecurity, because you don't have a very solid and robust kind of perception. So I think I got to know many things. Didi, I think if you teach IR like this, then I think that I can also teach IR. But I intentionally don't take interest in IR because I have seen people in IR, they speak about more practical things than about the theory, but I think I can handle the theory of IR. So thank you, Didi. This was a wonderful, talk. I got many things, and you gave very good examples. Now this is open for the discussion. So if you have any questions, I have already asked or invited questions. I think I have already written, you may raise your questions here, but I think I don't find any questions here. And I also asked Duroti actually a student from Africa, and she is a student of international politics. I told her to be the discussant, but she replied me that by telephone that, sir, I cannot hear the speaker properly due to this internet problem. So that's why I didn't force him. Otherwise, she is a very good student of international relations. So one question, Narendra, he is asking that, is social constructivist approach a response to the realist only? I mean, is it a response to realist approach, or it is something different? Yes, Didi.
A very good question, Narendra. It is not only a response to realist approach, because as I discussed, whenever a new theory emerges in the field of international relations, there is always a background to understand it, why it emerged. One small reason for its emergence, of course, is an opposition to what the neo-realists say about how state behavior could be understood only through rational choice behavior. So that is one reason. But the reason why social constructivism as a theory has emerged is mainly because most of the mainstream theories, not just realism, most of the mainstream stream theories like liberalism, classical liberalism, or whether we talk of idealism, because idealism is not something which guides social constructivism, but somewhere all the mainstream theories that we have been talking about, they did not address to the issues of understanding individuals as having an idea of their own, how interactions are important, how communication is important, how knowledge is power, how language is power. These are things, and most importantly, how identities are created. These are things which most of the conventional theories did not talk about. So as I told you, social constructivism emerged mainly because it wanted to give an alternative to all these theories, and also it emerged mainly because it wanted the world to understand that we live in a world of our own making. We all are living in a world of our own making. If we think that I live in a third world nation, it is because the way you have given an identity to it. So if we want to look at ourselves as one of the developed nations, industrially developed nations of the world, we should say that openly. Need not wait for the international authorities to give us a certificate. We should rather say that we are, yes, an industrially developed world, because it says that we have to understand how identities are created, and how identities then give us an interest to be achieved, and how norms always guide our behavior. So these are things which are very important to understand. And when we understand this, we will know that if we have given meaning to the world, we can change the meaning also. So if we all have given the meaning to gender, then we can change the meaning of gender. If we have given the meaning to state sovereignty, we can change the meaning. So this is a big opportunity that the social constructivism as a theory is opening up before us. That is, this is just a beginning for all of us to start thinking about how to attach meaning to different concepts that we talk about, and how we can change it, and that will give us a new identity. So that is a reason why this theory has come up. I hope I have answered your question,
Thank
Naren.
you, thank you. But
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
it raised a doubt in my mind that if my identity is shaped by the meaning, then you are saying that my identity can also shape the meaning.
I didn't get you. Identity is saved.
If my identity
Hmm.
is saved, I mean, the point you raised, that
Huh.
state exists within the
Post
world of their
huh.
making. That's the
Making.
point.
Hmm.
Right. Now, how the state is making its own identity, it is by perceiving the outside.
Hmm.
Right.
Yes. Huh.
So if the state identity is formed by its perception to the outside world, then I think your point is that if it is shaped by that, then the state's perception can also build up a better, outside, right?
Exactly.
But
Yes.
there I think it becoming more idealist in nature. So if I say that social
Hmm.
constructivist approach is an idealist theory, what will be your reaction?
Mm. See, idealism is something which which talks about non-verifiable consequences. Idealism is a theory which gives us an understanding of why state behaves the way they do. They talk about the possibility of a world government. They say that nation states are moral, and that's why they behave in their international relations in a moral way. So they idealists have a fixed meaning given to the state, whereas social constructivists say that no, states cannot have fixed meaning, they have different identities. Idealists say that nation states are always moral, and that's why their approach in international relations will also be always moral. They have fixed idea about what state's nature is and how they will behave. It is moral and moral in its approach. Whereas here, social constructivists say that no, our identities are always in a process of changing. Like I gave you what our identity of India was few years back, and now the kind of identity India is enjoying. Why Israel, a country which became so very important for us in the recent past, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the first Prime Minister of India to visit Israel. Before Modi, there was no Prime Minister who visited Israel. Because why did this happen? Because Israel, as we all know, is the leading country in the world, having the strongest intelligence intelligence strength. Their intelligence agency is the strongest in the world, even beyond the United States. So Israel is having that that identity and that reputation. So India, however, had strained relations with Israel because of Israel-Palestine issue. India had always supported the Palestinian cause, and that's why India was always at loggerheads with Israel. But in the recent past, India decided to go for a partnership agreement with Israel. This was mainly because our identities have changed today because of the kind of interactions we are having with the world community, and that has that has changed our interests. And one of our national interests is our cyber security, national nations building up nations defense and security dynamics. So for that, it is integral for India to get into partnerships with the countries like Israel, which can help us with our intelligence agency, building up a strong intelligence network. So that shows that when your identities are changing because of your interactions, slowly that will change your interest also, and that will result in the way you perceive others. So today the way we perceive Israel is different because our interests have changed. So this is all about how nation states perceive themselves, the kind of ideas they get, and how they translate those ideas into practice, and then they get into international relations with others. So the reason why India is having a very very special position in the global platform today is mainly, I would say, because of the soft power tool that the present government is using, and also it has been used by the successive predecessors also. Soft power is something which is helping us develop an identity, a special identity of our own. This is again an example of the way India perceives itself. So this is an identity. Yeah.
So thank you. I can see two more questions in the chat box. Duroti is asking, what is the difference between conventional constructivist and critical constructivist? what is the difference between conventional constructivist and critical constructivist?
Yes, this is a point. Very good, Dorothy. I had missed this point. These are the two streams of constructivism. Conventional constructivists, generally talk about the importance of ideas, norms, and identities. Whereas ideas and norms. Whereas when you talk of critical constructivists, they talk about how identities are created and put into practice, like what I talked about, how interactions result in generating an idea of our own, and how in the course of action, how this particular identity helps us in predicting what is our capability. Like for example, identities may not be visible, our identity may not be visible, the identity of China also may not be visible to us, but how we perceive their identity is something that will help us in um, uh, uh, you know guiding our behavior towards that particular nation state. So for the critical constructivists, as the term itself suggests, for them, how ideas are created, constructed, and how these identities, how identities are constructed, and how these identities would guide the behavior of nation states is more important for the critical constructivists. Whereas in other words, if I would tell you, conventional constructivists generally use the term what. They always talk about why this happens and what has happened, whereas critical constructivists mainly focus on how questions, how nation states can interact in their international relations, how this present crisis of Ukraine Russia can come to end. So critical constructivists would try to answer how related questions, how it can be done, whereas conventional social constructivists would try to understand and try to answer what related questions, what is a social norm, and what are identities, and what are national interests according to the social constructivists. So these are basically broadly the two ways, more or less the same, but as the term itself suggests, critical means they go a step beyond to find a solution to the problems rather than just defining it. Criticals try to find a solution to an existing problem. Okay.
So thank you, Didi. Pradeep, can you directly ask the question to our speaker?
Yes, sir.
You ask.
Pradeep, I have already read your question. You are asking about track to diplomacy. Very good question. How can we mend the relations between India and Pakistan through track to diplomacy? Track to diplomacy means involvement of non-officials in diplomatic discussions and dialogues. Certainly, I mean, track to diplomacy certainly can play a very, very important role in mending relations between India and Pakistan, because at the official level we have seen that there are lots of limitations and constraints. After the Uri attack, almost the relations between the two nation states has now become extremely hostile. SARC summit was cancelled, and since then we have not had any SARC summit also. So official level mein things are not going to be that easy. Non-official members, if they involve themselves through the involvement of civil society groups, non-governmental organizations, if at the individual level, influential individuals, they can play a very important role, and this is what is called as soft power. Like for example, if we allow in India Pakistan matches, cricket matches, to happen on within each other's territories, if we allow the Sufi singers from Pakistan to come to India and give a musical concert, these are cultural exchange programs, educational exchange programs. certainly can play a very important role, in mending the relations between the two countries. Because, again, when we talk about terror, or when we talk about, when we talk about statehood, it is all about perception. Today we are talking about global citizenship. So why just bother about, of course, it may sound a bit idealist when I say boundaries are very, very relevant. State sovereignty and boundaries are very relevant. But it is all about an understanding of how global citizenship should be allowed. Given the situation, track to diplomacy certainly can play a very important role, because it is all about our perception, which can change through cultural diplomacy. Yes.
So thank you, Didi. I know why I am asking candidates to ask question directly. It will strengthen their confidence. Now, the same thing I will do. Niyati, you can directly ask the question. Otherwise, I can also read it out.
Of course,
But
they should come out and read.
Yeah.
Niyati,
Niyati, are
you
you
are
there?
there.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
You unmute
So my
yourself.
um,
Niyati, you can ask.
okay, sir. Do we have any leading profounder in this theory of social constructivism, or which theorist we can follow in this aspect? Because as you said, ma'am, that knowledge is power, and here I can correlate knowledge, power, and truth as is given by Michel Foucault. And is India following social constructivism in a true sense?
Okay, a very very good question, Niyati. As mentioned in the beginning itself, there are many propounders to this theory, but the most important propounder of social constructivist approach to IR is the American political scientist Alexander Wendt. He had written a book, "Anarchy is what the states make of it." So, this book was published in 1992. From here, the discussion about social constructivism started. So, Alexander Wendt is the right person. He's the propounder of social constructivism as an approach to the study of IR. And rightly said, when you say knowledge is power and you are relating it to Michel Foucault, very, very correct, because as I told you in the beginning itself, all these theories, postmodernism and post structuralism, social constructivism, critical theory, all these theories are post positivist approaches. And all post positivist approaches have many points in common, like knowledge is power, language is more important. All these post positivist approaches, they reject outrightly the existence of any objective reality. They say that there is nothing called objective reality. It is only the meanings that we associate with these objects that is more important. So they all these theories talk about deconstruction, giving new meanings. Why should we follow the age old meaning given to terms? Give new meanings and understand. So this is exactly, yes, Michel Foucault is postmodernist. Social constructivism, both are related because both are post positivist approaches. And of course, yes, India, I would say, is the best example of how social constructivism is being put into practice. Because as I told you today, one of the important features of India's foreign policy is the soft power tool that India is adopting or has been adopting. How Indian culture, heritage, how Indian civilization, our values, traditional values, all these are being put before the world stage. How yoga today is now being internationally recognized and being practiced. Yoga, International Yoga Day is being celebrated now, International Non-Violence Day. All this is because of the fact that Indian values are now being respected. So India has realized that if you project our values, our attitudes and our ideas in the right way to the world, then India will get a different identity of its own, and that will change our interests also. So yes, India is following social constructivism.
Thank you, ma'am.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. She is a very good student of PG first
Okay.
semester.
Yes, this is a good question also.
Then Rajat is asking, can this theory of social constructivism play a middle ground between realism and liberalism? Are identities and norms always promote the national interest of both the interacting states?
Uh, Are identities and norms always promoting the national interests of both the interacting states? Um, this is a very, very tricky question, but yes, social constructivism, middle ground between realism and liberalism, that's a very interesting question. We have to first understand, realism mainly talks about power politics, liberalism talks about international cooperation. Yes, I think, Rajat, it will be very interesting if you can come out with something like this. You have thought about this itself is very great. You can, if you can justify it, yes. Because realism talks about power politics and how power plays a very important role in the behavior of nation states, their own national interests, how nation states are selfish in their national, giving importance only to their national power and national interest. On the other hand, we have liberalism, which talks about international cooperation. Social constructivism, yes, because social constructivism also says that survival is important, like the realists, and it also talks about cooperation, like the liberals say. Cooperation amongst the nation states is possible. So somewhere, yes, it can actually bridge a gap between realism and liberalism by making them understand that the meanings they give to the concepts they are talking about can change. They are not fixed, they are dynamic. So if they change their meanings of the concepts, then their viewpoints can be integrated somewhere. Yes. And our identities and norms always promoting the national interest. Yes, of course. The identities are created through interactions, and the interactions always give us the kind of interest that the nation state would have. When India and China interact with each other, that gives both of us an identity of ourselves, and that has given rise to the interest that we have. So China has a specific interest in India. India has a specific interest in China. For example, in spite of the very strained relations between India and China politically. Politically, we have very hostile relations between India and China. But if you look at economic relations, still India remains one of the largest markets for China. China remains the largest trade partner for India. So economic sense में different है, and politically it is different. So our identities would decide our interests, both sides. True.
It is also true in case of individual. When I am talking with you, then there is also my interest. When you are talking with me, there is also
Yes,
your
of course.
interest.
Yes,
So
yes. At
we
individual
cannot
level, we should understand.
we cannot avoid interest
True.
in the context of individuals, and we
Uh,
cannot avoid
okay.
national interest in context of
Yes.
nation state. So Didi, we don't have any other questions.
Good.
Very constructively discussed the social constructivist approach to international relation. Now we are at the last part of this event. Now I want my student Karan to provide vote of thanks to our speaker.
Am I audible, sir?
You just make your video on.
Good evening to one and all present here. Honorable Speaker of this webinar, Dr. Swapna Prabhu ma'am, Convener of this webinar, Dr. Himanshu Sekhar Mishra sir, and all the participants. It is such an honor for me to get the opportunity to present the vote of thanks to the speaker on behalf of all participants. I extend my gratitude to Honorable Speaker of this webinar, Dr. Swapna Prabhu ma'am, for taking time from her busy schedule to grace the event. She beautifully explained the social constructivist approach to international politics. Her main argument on how reality are socially constructed and social construction of international affairs. Ma'am, you also talk about emergence of social constructive approach, and basically the social constructivist approach is domain of post-positivist approach, which advocates the no objective reality and knowledge is power. Ma'am, you also give example of public diplomacy in order to make it clear the social constructivist approach to IR. Social constructivist theorists give emphasis on two aspects to regulate the behavior of nation state. One is norms and another one is identities. And identities are not static; it is dynamic. She stressed on four kinds of national interest of nation state, which are interest of survival, autonomy and independence, economic well-being, and collective self-esteem. Ma'am, you also explained seven basic assumptions of social constructivist approach to international politics. The first one is reality are socially constructed. State exist within a world of their own being. State are socially rather than material. Social interaction will always shape the interest and identity of states. Key structure in state system are intersubjective and non-material. Emphasis social constructivist approach emphasis on meaning given to material objectives rather than simply their existence. Social constructivist also key aspect of social constructive approach are norms, identities, and ideas. And the last one is the states have multiple identity. Ma'am, you also conclude by saying that social constructive approach strengthening the international politics and the importance of identities, interest, and norms in international politics. A special thanks to Dr. Himanshu Sekhar Mishra sir to organize such fruitful webinar and strengthening academics through these innovative initiatives. I also thanks my friend Pradeep for introducing the topic of the webinar. And I must thank all the participants who have made this webinar a great success. Thank you everyone once again for making it a great success. Thank you.
So, Karan, I think you did it. You were so nervous. Yes, sir, can I give the vote of thanks? Somehow you did it. In one point, I think you said wrong, but it's okay, no problem. I think once it is uploaded on the YouTube, then anybody can view it again and again, and one can understand our speaker. So thank you, Swapna Didi. Thank you very much. I mean, it was really good because I understand it. When I understand, then for me it is good. And you have that power in your, lecture and talk. And I used to make this point that as long as Swapna Didi is there in Utkal University, so there is political science. She would
No,
not
no.
lay it
Thank you
down.
so much for your
Again.
wonderful words.
Yeah.
Thank you, Himanshu, and thank you, Pradeep. Thank you all the students for your patient listening. It was an opportunity for me to interact with students of Sambalpur University, and I've always been wanting to, because we have heard so much about students of Sambalpur University, and we have seen the way they perform in inter-university competitions. Also, they have performed really well. So it's an honor for me to have been part of this lecture series, and extremely grateful to Dr. Himanshu to have given me this opportunity to interact with all of you. Thank you so much for all.
So
Thank you so much.
thank you, Didi. Namaste.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, all of you. Bye bye.